Greetings and welcome to the Introduction to Astronomy. In this week's Misconception in Astronomy, we are going to talk about the planet Jupiter and find out if it has the largest system of moons. So, does Jupiter have the largest system of moons in the solar system? And the answer is no. Jupiter, while being the largest planet, does not have the largest moon systems. It does have 4 large moons, as we can see here. Callisto off to the upper left, then Europa and Io toward the center, and finally Ganymede toward the lower right. Now, these were the first 4 moons to be discovered by Galileo in the early 1600s. And Jupiter is now known to have a large system of moons, but not the largest. In fact, what do we mean when we talk about moons? Well, a moon is essentially an object that orbits a planet, or a dwarf planet, or an asteroid. In fact, something orbiting an object in the solar system other than the sun. So that makes it, if we look at those, there are over 400 natural satellites orbiting the planets and dwarf planets in the solar system. And if we want to expand that, there are even more if we look at natural satellites that orbit around asteroids and around objects in the Kuiper Belt. So, if Jupiter is not the largest moon system, then what is? And it turns out it is the planet Saturn, one of the other large planets, but Saturn has over 250 moons that have now had orbits been determined. So we can look at a list of these here. When we look at the planets, very definitely Saturn by far has the most with 274, Jupiter with 97, and the rest all just have a few, with Uranus and Neptune having a couple dozen or so each. And in the inner solar system, there are not many moons at all. In fact, Mercury and Venus have none. Earth and Mars have a total of 3 between them. So, most of the moons in the solar system are in Jupiter and Saturn's orbits, but the vast majority of the moons that we know of are orbiting Saturn. Now, what are these moons? So how do we define a moon? Well, it's really any object orbiting one of these other things in the solar system. They're not orbiting the sun, but they are orbiting something else. So a planet would not be considered a moon. An asteroid would not be considered a moon because they are orbiting the sun. But there is no size limit essentially given to a moon. How big does a moon have to be? And what we find is that many of these are just tiny bits of icy material in the outer solar system. And in fact, a lot of them around Jupiter and Saturn are a kilometer or so in size. So they're not very big. They are in fact extremely tiny objects. And it depends as we find more. Perhaps we will make some kind of formal definition that will say then, that you need a certain size for a moon. Maybe some of these smaller objects will be classified as something else. And when we look at these total systems, only the largest moons have actually been named. Most of the others just have specific designations based on the year in which they were discovered. So let's finish up with our summary that we look at. So let's take a look at that and summarize what we've looked at here. And we find out that no, Jupiter does not have the largest system of moons in the solar system. In fact, Saturn has more than twice the number of moons. But many of these are very small objects, often a kilometer or less in size. So that concludes this week's Misconception in Astronomy on Jupiter having the largest moon system in the solar system. We'll be back again next week for another Misconception in Astronomy. So until then, have a great day, everyone, and I will see you in class.